I would like to welcome back to the stage Lady Edwina Grosvenor and with her Vasser Seydel for a conversation about what it means to be part of the next gen. We're extremely fortunate to have both of them here today. They've kindly agreed to share some personal insights on their philanthropic journeys and family dynamics. So yet more insights. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Edwina, let me start with you. What was it like growing up in your family? I mean, as a child, were you encouraged to experience the world of philanthropy?
Yeah, so I'm one of 4 siblings. My mother and father, again, this has sort of been said throughout the day, but it wasn't a sort of sit down, this is a conversation about philanthropy. It wasn't orchestrated at all. My mother was always philanthropically minded, as was my father, and it was just really in the conversations that we had. I was at a co-ed day school. I'd always come home in the evening. I'd always be talking with my parents and my siblings, and you just pick up through the conversations, you know, the people who work for us, you know, my parents cared deeply for them, and, you know, there was ways that they were helping members of staff. So it wasn't sort of like that traditional philanthropic thing. It was just, how do you look after other people? And if you have more, well, it's our duty to be giving and helping. Not in a condescending way, but just in that, if you have more, share with the people who don't. And if you can give someone else a leg up, it's not going to cost you a huge amount, but it might have a profound impact on that person. So it was subtle. It was through the conversations. And
now, when you were 12, I think there was quite a significant moment. Your parents took you to a drug rehabilitation centre to meet people going through rehab. Tell us about that. Why did they do it, and what impact did it have on you?
Yeah, so my parents, I think, were really worried that they obviously knew we were going to end up getting a lot. And I think they were mainly worried about issues like addiction, us turning to drugs, those sorts of things. And they knew that if they tried to tell us not to do it, we'd probably do the opposite. So that was quite enlightened of them, I suppose. So they decided to take us to a drug rehabilitation clinic in Liverpool. There was myself and my older sister. We sat in a room with 2 heroin addicts, a man and a woman. They were a couple. And that 1 hour of my life on Hope Street in Liverpool was profound. It was a case of ask them whatever you want. They're perfectly happy to answer any of your questions. Don't be scared, and just roll with it. And we did. And it was at that moment, at the very young age of 12 or 13, that I think it clicked for me. You don't end up taking drugs because you're leading your best life. They were masking trauma and things that had happened to them. I was suddenly aware of sort of my life and what I had. They didn't have it. So all these things sort of came together. But it was nice because it wasn't my parents sitting me down, sort of almost, I would have seen it as them preaching to me about something, even if they had, you know, my best intentions at heart. So yeah, and without me knowing it at the time, that shaped the rest of my life.
And then when you were 18, in your gap year, you went to work in a prison in Kathmandu. Tell us about that. That's a very brave thing to do. It's an 18-year-old English girl.
And my friends were sort of going up the Gold Coast in Australia in camper vans, and I was like, I'm going to Kathmandu to work in a prison. Does anyone want to come with me? And no one did. So I went by myself. And yeah, it's sort of cliche to say that I went on my gap year and found myself. But I went into a prison. I was in Central Jail in Kathmandu, and I came out, and it was literally, again, sort of this ridiculous light bulb moment. I was like, that was amazing. Prisons are places that everyone has an opinion on, no matter what country you're in. Very few people know what they're talking about, because very few people have been in them. And it's usually the people who really haven't been in them have the biggest opinions that are usually ill-informed. And I just thought, that's me for the rest of my life. My poor parents, I came home. It's like, right, I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and that was 25 years ago. And I still work in prisons. I've got 2 degrees in criminology, and I know I'll be doing it for the rest of my life.
Well, explain a little bit more about why was that a light bulb moment? I mean, did you sort of feel that prisoners are a sector of the population who are ignored and overlooked and who need a voice, and you were going to help give them a voice, or what?
So it's lots of different things, and I think, again, I've noticed with the work that I do in prisons all around the world, people just think you're working in prisons and it's about the prisoners. It's not just about the prisoners. It's primarily about the victims, and that gets misinterpreted all the time. It's about the victims, it's about the friends and the family, it's about the fact that actually justice is part of the fabric of our society. So everyone cares about crime on the streets and being safe. They care about justice and things being just and equal. But I don't want to talk about prisoners. I don't want to talk about prisons. It's like, do we not realize these two things are inextricably linked? And that's what I'm interested in. And sort of making that concept of prisons more mainstream and not just, oh, they're bad people who've done bad things. You know, that's actually not good enough.
And of course, part of that is rehabilitation.
Of course, because, you know, in England, we've seen a massive sentencing inflation. So we lock up more people in England than anywhere in sort of Western Europe. Our crime hasn't dropped as a result, by the way. So much so, a sentencing review has just been announced by our government this month. And it's about the quality of the sentence, not the quantity, because people are going to come out. And even the lifers in England, out of a population of about 87,000, only around 60 are going to stay in prison for life. Life meaning life inside. Without getting too technical, you know, lifers can be different. So therefore, if they come out, do we want them to be less violent, less likely to attack us? Well, yes, I think we could all agree that we do. So in which case, even if it's unpalatable to people, we need to be doing the work in the prisons to make sure we get the result that we want to see, because, of course, we pay for it. You know, our taxes go towards it. And at the moment, certainly in our country, it's a catastrophically expensive mistake.
Let's talk about the moment when you come of age into your family and you inherit this very large sum of money. What was that like, and how did your life change at that moment?
So there wasn't this sort of big moment. It was sort of always sort of weaved in. We sort of knew that we were going to, I guess, become wealthy. But our parents had always kept us on, like, no pocket money. We did not buy expensive anything. We were very much kept sort of feet on the ground, know your place type of thing. So, and it annoys my mother. My father sadly passed away about 8 years ago. But I remember when my mother would be like, God, will you just buy some smart shoes? It's about as smart as I get, sort of fancy trainers. But that's the way we had sort of been brought up. So there wasn't this sort of big bang moment. There were sort of people, trustees maybe, who sort of occasionally came in and sort of had a bit of a conversation with us about something. But, you know, I was young. I was a teenager. I was sort of like, God, let's get this meeting over and done with because I've got friends to see. So I sort of knew it was there. It was like the big thing that was there. But I didn't really understand what it meant for me, if I'm going to be honest.
Vasser, let me bring you in at this point. I mean, how was it for you? Was there a particular moment when you realized that you were part of this kind of extraordinary, very powerful, but also very philanthropic family?
So the Turner Foundation started in 1990. So I was -5 years old when the foundation started, which to some people that's actually young and with American philanthropies. But and when I was born, it was 1995, and the Braves just won the World Series. It's a baseball team, and so I was a baby at that game. So I came into this world with a very public family, and I don't actually ever really remember a certain moment, and just always was. And even philanthropy, because philanthropy is such a big part of who my grandfather is, and the spirit of generosity, which we heard about this morning, or the value of generosity. It was the conversations that we were having. It was what I was witnessing, not only in my grandpa, but my mother exhibits that very well. My dad, who married into the family, him and my mom started the Chattahoochee River Keeper in Georgia. That was the first billion-dollar lawsuit against a municipality to clean up our waterways. So, and I can go on and on. Both of my grandmothers, Jane Fonda and Pat Mitchell, in their own rights, are women who have been fighting for women's rights in the U.S. and around the world, for that matter, alongside climate justice and many other issues. So in my family, it just philanthropy, generosity, activism, and really having more so a global mentality just was what was exhibited, and I didn't really ever know anything different.
But what I found extraordinary, talking to you yesterday, was you said your grandfather, Ted Turner, actually started taking you on trips when you were 12 or 13 to see some of his philanthropy in action and see the world. Tell us about that.
It actually started younger than that.
Yeah? Okay.
I actually don't, I think it just, my parents always had the mentality of our kids are coming with us everywhere. For example, the Goodwill Games, I believe it was my first Goodwill game that my grandpa put on when there were boycotts for the Olympics. I was 5 years old in Brisbane, and so very much, talking about the Cold War and peace through sport. And we also traveled around with the United Nations Foundation. I went to, my first time in Asia was going to Japan and meeting survivors of Hiroshima, alongside, traveling around the world to whether it was Ghana or Shanghai and Beijing, or just all of these extraordinary places with vastly different cultures than growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, as you could imagine. And seeing the world through this lens where we were seeing issues that took many different forms, but oftentimes when you see the humanity, it's actually very similar to many of the issues that happen at home. But really getting to, once again, with the United Nations Foundation in particular, getting to see these issues being vocalized by people like Muhammad Yunus, or Kofi Annan, or Gro Bretland of Norway.
So you're meeting these people at a very formative age, people who've done extraordinary things in their own lifetime. That must be quite inspirational.
Yeah.
Because at that age, it imprints on you quite a lot, doesn't it? You're like a sponge.
Exactly. And so it wasn't just my grandpa, who obviously was the reason why I was there, but really just getting, because of who my grandpa was, getting to meet and grow up with extraordinary people who did extraordinary and are doing extraordinary things with their lives, true visionaries, and people and leaders that we could actually learn a lot from in today's day and age. So
but also quite bonding, I imagine, with your grandfather. I mean, doing all these trips and traveling with him and seeing what he did. I mean, that must have been quite nice for your relationship.
Yes, and while I think the global context is really unique of an experience and really important, it actually is more about the consistency of who he was at home. He has 2 million acres in the United States, which he converted from degraded cattle land, went through some learning processes of you can't just take down cattle guards and just restore ecosystems back to how they were with the balance of Native American people. But through that process, we now have regenerative grazing of bison. We've restored ecosystems, have done a lot of species restoration, and have wolves and the right kind of trout in the streams and all of that. But seeing that firsthand, so he's doing a lot of philanthropic work around the world for conservation and species, et cetera, but seeing him replicate that in his own world. And beyond that, I think one of those moments that is something that, because I was thinking earlier, like really has changed me when you have so much experience, was the smallest things that my grandpa does. Still to this day, which he's not walking like he used to, but I don't know if anybody's met my grandpa or gone on a walk with him here, but if you walked around the block here, he would stop if there was any piece of trash on the ground and pick it up and throw it away. And even though like he's done so much with systems change and so much in big ways because he's had the ability to do so, he has never felt like he's above walking past a piece of trash on the ground and picking it up. And so even in the smallest moments of
Do you do that?
Me and all of my cousins, by the way. So those are really the moments where you see your grandfather. Like the big things are great and formidable as well, but those are the moments that I think teach you the most in terms of values and consistency and also just, yeah.
Edwina, I want to come back to you. You said, as you mentioned, there are 4 kids in your family, in your generation, 3 sisters and 1 brother. Now, in Britain, there's a culture of primogeniture, and so although your brother is much younger, he inherited the family business upon the death of your father rather than you and your sisters. How did you feel about that? Were you resentful in any way?
No. So my father was the Duke of Westminster. He had a catastrophic heart attack one day, out of the blue. And as soon as his heart stopped beating, my brother became the Duke of Westminster. It's as quick and as sudden as that. So it was quite the time for us all. My heart really went out to my brother, actually. Us 3 girls have been dealt with very fairly and very equally. Of course, my brother not only inherited the title, but Grosvenor Estates, the property company globally, and all sorts of things with that. So he had a lot to grapple with. He was 24 years old. He had been out here. He lived here for a bit, working at Grosvenor. He reminded me the other day, telling me which bars to go to if I get any time off then. And I was like, I'll see if I can escape. And so, no, I'm so lucky I get on so well with my siblings. There's my older sister who's about 45, and then I'm 43, and then there's a 10-year sort of age gap, and my younger brother and sister in their sort of early 30s. And my husband's always fascinated, actually, at how well we do get on. So I think instead of there being sort of resentment, there was more a culture of supportiveness. Again, coming back to the parents, my mother was all about the nest, keeping the nest together no matter what. And I think that translated down from our mother. Tamara and I, because we were older, we felt very maternal around our younger brother and sister. And it's kind of like, Christ, you know, we're all fighting a different grieving battle here. And the power structure suddenly goes, boom. You know, it's incredible. And some of you in the room might have experienced it, or the next generation of philanthropists will experience it at some point, given what we've talked about today. And I'd say that is a real moment. And I'm not sure any paid professional necessarily is equipped to be able to deal with what that means when a supporting pillar of your family is taken away and everything has to land somewhere. And you as your own family, only you can navigate that, actually. There's obviously other people who understand what that's like in a way that other people won't. So I think that peer-to-peer sort of relationships amongst philanthropists is important. And I know I'm lucky in my family, a bit like yours from what we've talked about. You know, we have supportive family structures, which has been built on a culture. And not all families are like that, I know.
So, I mean, you seem to be saying that actually, far from envying your brother, you actually felt fortunate because you have more liberty, really, in your situation too. And since we're focusing on philanthropy today, to actually do what you wanted philanthropically with the money that you'd inherited.
Yeah, and I've thought about this a lot over the years, and I think there's clarity and simplicity. So think about whatever anyone wants to feel about primogeniture is, of course, down to the individual. But, you know, we knew as us girls, we were going to get sort of X amount. Thank you very much, that's lovely. We don't need to work in life, but that comes with its own risks. But my mother was very much like, you create your own orbit. Live where you want, do what you want. You don't need to come with your begging bowl because, you know, you've been looked after. And actually, I was like, great. I'm going to buy a house on the sea. I'm going to do this. I'm going to carry on working in prisons. And I sort of had my own little roadmap. But that's down to the character of me. I sort of knew I had to make my own plan. You know, the plan was set for my brother. It's very rigid. It's very da-da-da-da-da. There's your plan because you're the boy. And girls, good luck. And that can either go one way or the other. And, you know, us three girls were all very happy. One sister living in Kenya, one in Cheshire in England. I'm down on the south coast. But I decided to make my career my philanthropy. It was really important to me that I didn't float around doing sort of nothing and just seeing friends. I wanted to become an expert in something. And I went into a prison aged 18. I thought, God, this is fascinating and dangerous and exciting and all those things. I think this is what I want to become an expert in.
And you recently did a master's, didn't you? Or...
Yeah, in crime scene management and forensic evidence. So, yeah, not for everybody, but I found it fascinating.
That's fantastic. Vasser, let me come back to you to discuss how it works with your siblings and cousins, because you actually set up a third generation board, didn't you? Tell us how that works and what you do on your third generation board.
Mm-hmm. Well, so before going there, before the third generation board was established, at the age of 14, you're an honorary board member of what we now call the senior board, or that's the Turner Foundation. You're not a voting member yet. But at
14, you can attend board meetings.
But at 14, you could. And at 25, you are a voting member on the board. When I was in college, I worked with our staff to create a third generation board. And even though there's been great engagement because we do retreats every summer and where we do site visits around the world, and now we're doing them a little bit more locally where my grandpa is at his age in the States. But those really had an uptick in just participation, seeing this work, having that value of generosity and philanthropy from a young age. And then creating the third generation board really was more of a way to, okay, you're 13 years old, you can come onto the board if you so choose. We have a 100% uptake in that thus far. We only have 2 cousins to go, but we feel confident
because
they're too young. But you know, one of the draws is just simply you get to be with your cousins, and I feel like people don't want to be on the outskirts of that. And then the other is we get to allocate money how we would like to, and we have our own discretionary and own giving. So we created our mission, we created our vision, we created our board terms as a unit, so it also gave us agency. And yeah,
so what sort of causes have the third generation board given to?
Yeah, we largely, we started with kind of putting everything that we personally wanted to do on sticky notes and putting it on the wall. And we found where our intersection is. And to my grandfather's, joy, we landed on something very similar in terms of the environment, but the difference is the connection of youth and the environment. So that's our main giving focus, but we do giving as well in communities around where my grandpa has property. And we've actually given to a lot of different things because we recognize that actually the communities know, especially in these rural communities, what they need, more so than fitting just a priority area that we would love to see. So sometimes we hit that sweet spot where it overlaps, but sometimes these small communities need things that we've never even thought about before. So We tend to give all over the place, which is very different than kind of more structured of the senior board, but we've been able to find our own agency in that, which really also has created such a great context for when you do get to sit on the Turner Foundation board. We have a voice, we've known how to exercise it, and we've also found ourselves in a little bit of this giving journey, so that we're really excited and prepared to be on the board.
To start training the next gen as early as 13. That's absolutely wonderful. Edwina, as we've heard, you've chose to invest your philanthropy in reforming the prison system in the UK. I mean, it's not exactly a fashionable cause, let's put it this way.
Say that again, yeah. It's not the easiest thing to fundraise for.
Yeah, I mean, so you're a bit of an outlier in that sense. I mean, how did your siblings view that particular cause, and your friends? Have they?
Well, I think I've worked in prisons for so long, and that it's always been there. It's always been part of me. I've always been slightly, I don't know, I was known as the rebel when I was younger. I was always off doing my own thing, so I think a lot of it isn't really a surprise to people. But one thing I will say is that I actually looked at setting up a foundation and decided not to. So I actually give personally, and this came up at some point with one of our speakers, and I looked into setting one up. I saw all the red tape, I saw all the regulations, and I thought, not for me. I want to be flexible. I want to be able to give to what I want. I want to be able to give to something that maybe isn't a registered charity in our country. So I've been able to do some incredibly exciting things because I don't have a foundation, interestingly. So yeah. I would certainly say to any next generation philanthropist that might be sort of dialing in virtually or here is really do your research. Don't just go with the status quo because that's what lots of people are saying you should do. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. And for some people who don't quite know how to give, or having that structure is really important. I became an expert in my field. It's what I do. I call it my job. I obviously don't get paid to do it. But I sort of do my own due diligence, and I've brought people in around me to help me. But no, it's not a sexy area. It's a very misunderstood area. But there's a lot of work to do. But I think it's also crucial to say, though, that it can be fun, and philanthropy should be fun. We were talking about this yesterday. You brought it up. And it reminded me to get that over. What a privilege that we have to be able to do this.
Which is why I guess it's important to choose something you feel passionate about. And you clearly, and we heard James talking about how he was passionate about eyesight, and you're passionate about prisons, and that makes it fun, doesn't it?
Totally. My husband and I, my husband's a historian, and when we go on holiday, I laugh because he needs to find a battlefield, I need to find a prison. If we both find those things, we're happy. And our children are like, yeah. Can we just go to the playground? But no, we may not.
Now, another thing we've talked a lot about today is working with government, which brings me on to my next question. You recently built and opened a new residential facility which offers an alternative to prison for women with children in the UK. It's called Hope Street. It's been hailed as a pioneering solution within Britain's criminal justice system. Extraordinary building, which has won all sorts of architectural awards. Can you see yourself going forward? This is an example really of sort of venture capital. You've set up this sort of beacon, this pilot scheme as a model for how you can help incarcerated women and their children remain together. Would you like to partner with the UK government to scale that up? Is that the plan?
Absolutely. So the name, you might remember me saying I went to Hope Street when I was 12 or 13. So this project is called Hope Street because of that, but it's in a different geographical area in the county of Hampshire in England, and the project sits over the whole county. It's designed to be replicable and scalable, so that if you had a Hope Street in Cheshire, Lancashire, any other shire, it works in the same way with the judiciary, with the police, with probation, with the prisons. In our country, we imprison women for their own safety, and if they're homeless, they cannot get a community sentence. So in order for a magistrate to be able to give a woman a community sentence, they need an address. So if they're homeless or they're abusers in their home, the magistrate says, I'm very sorry, I can't find any safe accommodation for you in this county, I have to send you to prison. So that is widespread. The women are usually the primary carers, so therefore where do we think the children go? They end up in the care system. I got so bored of listening. I've advised governments, I've worked in Parliament, I've been around this topic for a very, very long time. I got so bored of the inaction and sort of people wringing their hands, I sort of thought, actually, one thing I can do as a philanthropist, and with my expertise, is design my own system and build my own system, because I'm not sure I can change this dysfunction. I'm not sure I can turn this oil tanker around, but what I can do is try and design what good would look like. So I set about the design process, and then I thought, well, if I get as far as to design the Rolls-Royce version, let's put a business plan around it. Could we cost it up? Could we do this? Could we pay the staff? Is this even possible? The answer is yes, of course. So then I decided to start building. We designed it, architecture, we started building. The Princess of Wales opened it a year and a half ago. So we now have women coming in from prison if they're eligible for early release. They get sentenced to us by the magistrates. They come to us on remand, so awaiting trial, pre-trial. And we exist in order to drive the number of non-violent, low-risk women who shouldn't be in prison down. So in answer to your question, I did see the Lord Chancellor and the Justice Secretary last week to have a discussion with her about if it's philanthropists, which it is, that has built this, myself, my family, and lots of other trusts and foundations who've taken a risk on me and on this sort of project, how can we then flip the economic model to make sure that it's 75% locally commissioned at a local level? Because the issues we're dealing with are housing issues, they're health issues, it's education, it's poverty. The criminal end sort of comes down here. But then 25% of the pie chart, I believe, should always be local philanthropy and fundraising. So we've got a long way to go, but...
You're saving the state, presumably, huge amounts of money.
Millions.
Because kids in care cost...
About £1 million a year.
£1 million a year. And if they're in care, they're more likely to end up in prison, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I always sort of think with philanthropy, this isn't cracking the Enigma code. This isn't the ethics of artificial intelligence. And this is what keeps me excited, is we do have the solutions, often. We know what they are. And actually, it's just the bit that isn't happening is the action. And someone mentioned political will. And, luckily, I didn't have to wait for politicians. I didn't have to wait for the bureaucratic machine to kick in. I've managed to get it up, open, running, operating. And now I have a case to make to the government. It does fit in line with the sort of political sort of direction of travel, which is useful. But I hope that over my lifetime, that we can see more Hope Streets popping up. We're gathering the data, which is super important. We've got a £500,000 evaluation running alongside Hope Street. So yeah, we'll cross our fingers and see where we get to.
What a wonderful legacy. I mean,
yeah, I don't think about that. There's been a lot of talk about legacy. I just do what I love. And I sort of think the legacy is something that people will talk about after I'm dead, so I don't really care.
The legacy will be all those children who are being given a future because they're still with their mums. Vasser, you mentioned that your passion is the environment and so on. I assume in a family full of philanthropists like yours, was it difficult to carve out your own space? I mean, did you spend a lot of time kind of thinking, oh God, what's my cause going to be? What am I going to focus on? Or did it just kind of come naturally?
Yeah, considering I changed my major many times in college, I would say yes. I think I went into college, everything I knew is around environment, climate, et cetera, and I knew I was just passionate about so many, and there are so many different issues in the world. So I went more so with the mindset of what do I not know that I might want to do? But after graduating and consulting on many different things, all roads for me ended up in the environment, nature, and climate space. Really because it's the intersection of all of the things. Everything is a solution and everything is intertwined. So for me, at the end of the day, I really realized that, I had to be working in the environmental world. Yeah.
Now, I watched your excellent TED Talk, which I recommend to everybody here, which is on the dangers of deep sea mining. Not something a lot of us think about, I mean, how did you land on that as something that you wanted to focus on? I mean, I know it's not your only focus, but it's one of your key focuses.
Yeah, it actually was the turning point for me that I went from consulting on a lot of different topics to just focusing in the climate world. All of these issues have kind of chosen me, and they've all been very controversial when I've chosen them. And when I say they're controversial, it's largely because there's misinformation, greenwashing, and not great education on these topics like deep sea mining. Deep sea mining really is something that affects all countries and everyone around the world because it's an area that's over 50% of the entire Earth's surface, which is right now on the table to be open to mining. And really where it's this greenwash issue is it's for rare earth minerals.
So this is transition minerals that we need, like lithium and rare earth, in order to get the green transition. And
And that's where the greenwashing comes in.
Right.
Because the word need, when you go to the very ecosystem that doesn't just underpin climate change, but climate, period. These are the most fragile ecosystems in the world, most biodiverse regions in the world, which we did not understand when we created the International Seabed Authority that is really the mandate is to open mining in this global commons. But it's also, like I said, the most biodiverse place on Earth. It's our largest carbon sinks. And really, when we're seeing the ocean as really this buffer for runaway climate change, we are about to go for the absolute jugular of an already dying ocean. So if we keep tinkering with our ocean as we are, which all of the litmus tests of the ocean are pointing towards us flipping off the ocean conveyor belt, which would put us back into an ice age. So when we talk about the environment, largely it gets in our minds in this little box of carbon and climate change, and it's a pretty big box, but it gets put in this climate change box. But really, we're messing with ecosystem services that actually potentially have far greater cascading effects that aren't just about carbon in our atmosphere. But yeah, so that actually sent me onto this campaign to stop deep sea mining and to educate the world about the issue before it was too late. And now I run an organization called the Oxygen Project. We work on underrepresented issues, like deep sea mining was our first one. We do a lot of protecting ecosystems. I was told when I first picked the issue of deep sea mining, an advisor said, I would be very careful about getting in the business of stopping things. That's a certain energy that I don't know you will get burnt out on, might not experience success with. And I was like, okay, I'm doing it anyways. But after really being in this business, I really realized, it's not just stopping something. It's actually one of the largest climate solutions that I am aware of, because we have 2 carbon capture technologies that wasted billions of dollars in the US when we have the largest carbon sink on the planet right now for free that we're about to, if we unleash these regulations, we will permanently destroy because you can't repair deep sea ecosystems. But it's not just about the deep sea. We also have a campaign right now in Panama to protect 25% of Panama's mangroves, which right now, from the previous government, have been licensed to create a port, which would dredge over 800,000 dump trucks of this ecosystem, of these mangroves. And that's more than really any carbon capture technology could ever do. So basically, in human terms, we're gonna go destroy the only working carbon capture technology that we don't know how to recreate within a blink of an eye. So that's
it's the case now, isn't it, that scientists believe that these, what they call these blue carbon systems, which is mangroves, seagrass, wetlands, absorb as much carbon as rainforests.
More.
Yeah.
More.
So very
Wildly
very,
more.
very important.
And intact blue carbon ecosystems are, it should be, I think it's obvious, are way better at doing so than recreating and trying to restore these ecosystems.
And also protecting us from storms and so on. But anyway.
Exactly.
This is a question for both of you. If there are other, next-gen philanthropists setting out, like yourselves, trying to find their niche, what advice would you have for them? Starting with you, Edwina, and then.
So yeah, I think I said it already, which was make sure you do your research on the different ways you want to give. I think giving is intensely personal. The way I give is not the way the next person might, and that's okay. I'd say, and this is a big one and a sort of tricky one to distill, but it's sort of something to do with your identity, who you are and your sort of love for the environment, who I am. I always sort of say, you'll find the real me inside a prison. This isn't, I'm not paying lip service to this subject. If I didn't have what I have, would I still be working in prisons? Yes, because that's what I'm good at and that's what makes my heart sing. So all of this stuff can sound very highfalutin and sort of complicated, but fundamentally it's about you, your identity, and really what makes your heart sing. So if you can sort of tap into that and sort of forge ahead, then I know it can be difficult when there's elders in the family that might have a different view of your subject matter. I know a lot about that. But, keep polite, try and keep the family dynamics, under control, but just ultimately...
Because your dad wasn't that excited about you going into prison, so to speak.
I don't think either of my parents were sort of cheering from the rooftops when I said, actually... But actually, to be fair to them, they certainly didn't say, no, don't. They could see I was happy, I was engaged, I was doing something. That's what they cared about. My father fought big battles with the Ministry of Defence for territorial part-time soldiers. My battle is with the Ministry of Justice in a sort of similar vein. So there were many similarities between him and I. And maybe that's what some of the fun challenge we had together. He could recognise himself in me. But he was, I know he was proud, and I know that he'd be happy that I'm doing what I'm doing.
And Vasser, your advice to others setting on this journey?
Yeah, I have a lot of advice, so which I can't all give right now. But the riskier thing I will say, and I'm more called to use this time to say, is that we have 4 years, 244 days by today till we experience runaway climate change, where it's too late where we've surpassed tipping points. We have over 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, and we lose the opportunity to put the cat back in the bag with climate change. I say that because not everybody's passion is going to be to work on solutions within climate, but most everybody's passion does dovetail in some way, whether it's vision. I mean, if you can't see, how can you be, the next solutionist in your community? And I really do think everything's interconnected. So I say that time, it's called the climate clock, you can look it up. I say that not to incite fear, I say that to incite agency and urgency, and I think especially as unpopular as it might be to say in the philanthropic sector, I hope it also inspires people to be more bold, ask tougher questions, bring up hard conversations, and push for more progress and more giving at this time, because if you have kids, or if you potentially want to have kids, or you have nieces, or you love nature, really there's never been a better time to do these things than now, and we do have a ticking clock.
Edwina, you've got young children. Are you passing on this sense of giving back to your kids?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it comes in the small conversations. You know, my kids will be like, why is our garden so big? And the conversations they have at school, and it's sort of saying, well, we sort of have more because of this and that, and trying to sort of put it into context for them can be quite difficult. They're 9, 10, and my daughter's 13. So there's those sorts of conversations that come up about, you know, what you have and why someone might not have, and how do you deal delicately and sensitively with your peer group. And then there is the sort of, yeah, we're just going to the food bank to wrap parcels in a couple of weeks' time, so I'm going to take the kids after school. I'm not going to particularly sit them down and give them a lecture about it, but we're going to go along, we're going to do it and just let it be. We have a coffee shop open to the public at Hope Street, so that's an environment where my children, so there was a lady who was about to be released from prison homeless, but she was a week off giving birth. She came to Hope Street instead, and she had her baby with us, but on her due date, she was in the coffee shop. I was having lunch with my husband and my children, so I said, oh, you know, come over and meet so-and-so. I won't say her name, but come over and meet her. And she was sort of sitting there with her big belly, and the children were like, oh, are you excited about having your baby? So again, sort of one of those moments. You can't take a child under the age of 18 into a prison, and arguably you wouldn't want to, but I'm just glad now that I've created a space where not only my children can have these interactions, but actually other members of the public, when they come to Hope Street, they can have those interactions without it being a big, strange thing.
And just finally, Vasser, Edwina talked earlier about kind of when looking for, at a certain moment, looking for a mentor who was also in a similar situation, a next-gen philanthropist, and how you cope with that. How useful is it having conversations with other next-gen, you know, and being part of that community and swapping stories and looking for ideas?
I have so many instances of just this being so important for me. Even though, as I alluded to earlier, I never quite, I always knew that my family was different, and I grew up in philanthropy, but at the same time, I was never really sat down to have a conversation about it. It was, I think my family just thought, okay, you're learning from experience and osmosis, and you kind of just get it, and you'll figure it out. And I think through, whether it's the Giving Pledge, or whether it's the National Center for Family Philanthropy, which I'm on the board of, or events like this, where you get to meet other people doing this work around the world. Even today in a conversation with Emily, I saw so much of my personal story and journey within hers, and even kind of these aha light bulb moments going off of whether, yeah, it's just your own personal experience within this. So not only is it important for you growing as a person, but also I think being more strategic and how we can make more impact and yeah, do more with the time that we're given. And I do want to say one thing, because I have a feeling we're wrapping up.
Yep.
Today, I don't want to miss this moment, because since Hong Kong, we're on a very different time zone, I missed, it's my grandpa's 86th birthday. So I missed getting to call him. So I know he's not on the other receiving end of this, but I just want to bring him into the room and say happy 86th birthday to my grandpa Ted.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a
I know.
fantastic
I
note to
realized
end
it
on.
this morning.
Vasser Seydel and Edwina Grosvenor, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. It's a really great ending to an insightful day.